Hello, I'm Doris Ober, speaking to you in the perfect location for a story about Scottish Highland steer. Moe and Curly were the first animals that came to live with Richard and me in Dogtown. I had had cats before and birds, but nothing bigger than that, and I was nervous. But Richard assured me that the animals would be no problem at all, that they would take care of themselves, because after all, they lived in a salad. They were delivered in a horse trailer and walked down a short ramp into the meadow. They were smallish, stocky, blocky animals, about 6 months old, the size of ponies. One was very red, Moe. One was strawberry blonde, Curly. They were darling, actually. Moe's bangs hung over his eyes, and Curly's curled deeply over his forehead between conical 6-inch horizontal horns. And it was just as Richard imagined. They were fabulous, making their way through the tall grass, or browsing in the woods on the edge of the driveway, or grazing near the pond reflected in it. They never seemed to suffer any culture shock so far as we could see, and they fit right in among the transient meadow population of fallow and black-tailed deer, bobcats and foxes and families of raccoons, and the geese. We watched them bang heads and head wrestle. We saw them run and frisk. They were no trouble, as predicted, though I managed to keep my distance, and Richard loved them. He'd walk down to the meadow with 2 buckets of molasses-coated corn, oats, and barley, and it didn't take long for the boys to associate Richard and those 2 buckets with good times. They'd come galloping over at the sight of him. Richard wanted to play. He'd tussle with them, grabbing their horns when they bent to the buckets to eat. He tried to scratch their heads. You must understand, we were not irresponsible idiots, just very ignorant in the way of large animals, especially large horned animals. Their first bit of mischief was to show us that the cattle guard we had installed on their behalf was no impediment whatsoever. They just walked across it, down a short, unpaved easement to California Highway 1. Turning south, they ambled off toward Bolinas. The sheriff was not amused. He called as Richard was about to leave to play tennis. "Your cattle are on Route 1. We've got traffic backed up in both directions." We drove down to the road and pulled the car off the easement. Richard waded out into traffic with his red and green buckets of corn, oats, and barley, and set off after our bad boys. What I saw when I walked to the edge of our driveway was Richard in his tennis shorts running toward me, buckets swinging in either hand, and pounding down the street behind him, Moe and Curly, and alongside all this, the astonished faces of stopped drivers. Richard veered into the driveway, crossed the useless cattle guard on his toes, carried the buckets of grain up past the pond and the culvert, where he dropped them and backed off, because there were Moe and Curly coming at him fast. We parked a car across the cattle guard until we could install a gate.